You're listening to Healthcare Now Radio. Stand by for This Just In, the latest in healthcare innovation and technology trends with your HIT advisor, Justin Barnes.
Thank you for tuning in, and welcome to This Just In. I'm your host, Justin Barnes. In these half-hour segments, I'll bring you the latest advancements in healthcare, strategy, innovation, and public policy. As always, we're broadcasting from the This Just In studios on the Business Radio X network, as well as the Healthcare Now radio network. And before we dive in with my special guest today, I want to take a moment and remind everyone that we'll be broadcasting live again the This Just In radio show from the HIMSS annual conference. HIMSS conference this year will be in Orlando, Florida, starting next month, February 20th. We already have a great slate of CEO, CIO, leading care providers, industry thought leaders, and certainly policymakers joining the show again. Some familiar faces, but also many new, so you certainly want to catch us. Much more to come from the HIMSS media team in the coming weeks, but we'll have our same two-day format, and again, we'll be broadcasting live from the HIMSS annual conference show floor, February 20th and 21st. We're even building the same ESPN College Game Day look and feel, but double the size. We're going to double the size of the booth, double the size of the stage, so it's guaranteed to be another great time. I'm looking very, very forward to it. Ryan, my producer, is going to come down with me as well. So we're going to have a great time, see a lot of friends. I think it's about 36,000 of our closest friends, and this year I think they're projecting over 40,000. So it's going to be a lot of fun. However, for this episode, my 81st episode, we have a very special guest, CMS Deputy Chief of Staff and Director of Delivery System Reform, Tim Gronniger. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks, Justin. Good afternoon.
Afternoon. Great to have you here. So before we dive in too deep, because I'm very excited, you were here in Atlanta last month and just did a fantastic job on the panel talking about MACRA and MIPS and the Quality Payment Program, and then just about delivery system reform in general, and we're going to dive into all the beautiful components of that. But before we dive in, tell us a little bit about your background and where you grew up and college and all that good stuff.
Sure. So I grew up in the suburbs of Kansas City in a small town called Olathe, Kansas, and I stayed there through high school and grew up and have been a lifetime Kansas Jayhawk fan. I went to school in Boston. I went to Harvard and studied biochemistry. And over several years, I acquired a love for and was quickly burned out on biochemistry, working in labs for very long hours. But the good piece of it was that I realized that my real love and desire was in pursuing interests in health policy and health care. And after that, I went to graduate school after a little bit of time working as a healthcare consultant with pharmaceutical companies, actually. I went to graduate school at the University of Michigan, where I did degrees in public health and public policy, health services administration. And after that, I moved to Washington, D.C., where I've been for 12 years now. I have worked in a lot of different jobs in D.C., including jobs for the legislative branch, both in nonpartisan, as we say, capacities at the Congressional Budget Office, where I worked as an analyst estimating the costs of legislation affecting Medicare, for example. And then in 2008, I decided to join ranks with the committee staff at the House Energy and Commerce Committee, working for first Chairman John Dingell and then Chairman Henry Waxman, and had the good fortune to be able to jump right into the legislation that was the Recovery Act and then the High-Tech Act, where we, working with a whole host of others, were able to create and fund the High-Tech Act programs, including for better and for worse meaningful use, much of it, from my perspective, for better, of course, with many well-known drawbacks that we have been trying to improve and correct over the last few years. After that, I went to the White House for a few years to work on coordinating the efforts of the administration to execute the delivery system reform provisions of the Affordable Care Act. And I joined up with CMS 2 years ago now, almost 2 years ago, to work on much the same topics, and have been trying to help make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable for both doing what we can to support improvement in the delivery system, making sure that we are improving affordability for patients, and that we are keeping an eye on costs. And also, as an important part of all of that work, making sure that the delivery system reform initiatives work and make sense for clinicians and healthcare systems in the country, that they take away burdens and that they make available more time for patient care, and don't just layer on reporting requirement after reporting requirement.
Yeah.
So that is a little bit of mix of my background and my work. But I have been here for 12 years. I work with some of the most amazing people in the world, and I consider myself a very lucky person through and through.
Did you ever work with Peter Orszag at the OMB?
Peter and I overlapped when I was at the Congressional Budget Office, and I worked with him. He was one of the lead negotiators from the administration side on the Affordable Care Act while I was on the Hill, so I worked with him in that capacity as well. He's obviously very smart and well-informed observer of the healthcare system, and has baked a lot of the ideas from him and his research into the Act.
Yeah, no, I worked with him a little bit around the same time, so it's I'm surprised I didn't come across. We didn't meet earlier only because I worked on the Obama transition team. I worked with them. I was on obviously the industry side, but they called us in pretty early on when the HITECH Act was in its formation. Not really not as much as the ACA, as much as the HITECH Act specifically. But remember Lauren Aronson? Remember?
Lauren's a very good friend of mine.
Okay.
Yes.
She's the person who
and I worked with her in multiple capacities, both when she was on the Hill and when she was at CMS and at the White House.
Yep.
And I saw her recently. She's doing great. And you remember that was a really extraordinary time in policy generally, and for the country. We were over 10% unemployment. The high-tech provisions of the law were nobody's top priority at the time, in the sense that there was the largest recession since the Great Depression. There were financial reforms. There was a lot happening, and the Recovery Act was a major lift very early in the administration, and then we immediately jumped into the next phase, which was the Affordable Care Act, which took more than a year from that point on to go through the hearings, the writing, the markups, the floor work, and then the getting to final passage in March of the next year.
Yep. So let's fast forward, because you've obviously been instrumental. How long have you been working on MACRA? Because I know a lot of my guests and listeners want to listen.
So in the sense that most of my heavy-duty engagements and work with MACRA has been since it was passed, since I've been in the administration, during the work of MACRA itself. Since around and before the time it was passed, we have been looking at how to implement it effectively. More generally, I worked on more than 10 SGR patch and replacement bills while I was on the Hill, and they were always a nightmare, and they were always a little bit of an embarrassment, honestly, as a health policy professional. Mm-hmm. And so we had been kicking around many of these sorts of ideas, and I drafted some, along with colleagues, some predecessor legislation that had similar ideas. So the MACRA has been in the air for a long time and has been shaped by bipartisan leadership on both sides of the aisle on the Hill for a period of years.
For sure. So at a high level, because we're going to dive in deeper and deeper as we go, how can we use MACRA to provide better care for patients, families, and communities? Kind of get everybody's attention to start off with. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's the most important question that we asked as we started implementing the law. What was clear to us was that if we were going to simply create Meaningful Use 2.0 combined with PQRS 3.0 and Value Modifier 2.0 and have them the sum total of what the MACRA or the quality payment program, as we often refer to it, that wasn't going to work, and that wasn't going to support care improvement in a very efficient way. And so we went out into the field and talked to a lot of clinicians about how to implement it and what they needed to support improvement in care for the patients they see. And I think that the important dynamic here is that the payment system impacts care delivery in subtle and historically not helpful ways. The analogies are always around what sort of result would you get if you pay the carpenter by the inch for the size of your house. You'd probably get more house than you need, and in some cases would lead to structural problems. That has been a known problem in healthcare for a long time, and MACRA provides a framework for addressing it over time. And you probably have seen the New York Times article from yesterday about the Indiana University Hospital by Jonah Kessel. Mm-hmm. Really interesting and powerful piece that goes out and he observed for a week the work of this hospital. And this hospital is working on a project that we started last year along with hospitals across the country that reforms the way we pay for and support care for hip and knee replacements. Mm-hmm. We call it our joint care replacement model. And what you really see here, and you see variations of this in a lot of our alternative payment models, is a new focus on the outcomes that patients actually care about. In this case, it's care and results for a patient over an extended period of time, not just in the hospital setting. So the hospital leaders that they talked to were really clear that they were focusing on 90 days of care, which is a good measure, a good proxy for a patient's total experience of a joint replacement. That they are measuring everywhere, measuring everything and everything, both clinical quality measures, also cost efficiency measures. They found numerous examples of clinicians using a more expensive product with not a real clear clinical benefit just because that's what they've always done. Yep. And you see real sense of responsibility for outcomes of a patient. Whereas before the responsibility is diffuse and is sort of attached to I'm responsible for the patient at this specific moment in time when he's in front of me. But after that, I hand him off to the post-acute care provider and expect that will go okay. Now it's I'm following up with the post-acute care provider, and I'm using a more efficient post-acute care provider because I am going to be held responsible for that. And you can look at this and say that this is asking too much, or that this is not a fair request. But what we've heard and what we've seen in many of our models is that this type of model supports the type of care that clinicians want to provide, that if we are providing payment based on total outcomes, whether it's for an episode or for a year in the case of ACO models, for example, that allows clinicians to innovate and provide care in ways that are, say, not when the patient's directly in front of you. You don't have to bill for every single thing you do in this type of model in order to have financial viability. And, there are a lot of kinks to work out. I don't mean to say by any stretch of the imagination that everything is baked and everything is perfect. This is something that's going to take years and years to transition through and to get right. But I think that stories like this show that we've got a really good start on some promising new models.
No, I agree. So knowing that we just closed the 60-day comment period that was open, do you see any changes coming from that final rule comment period?
Yeah, so we are still looking through the comments that we've gotten, and we'll be, we need to do rulemaking in the next year for the entire program because some of the rules of the road haven't been set. We wanted to make sure we were getting a full set of input and feedback on the first year of the program, and so we took the somewhat unusual step of making it a final rule with comment period. Right. I don't have anything to announce on that front now, but we certainly will be trying to follow the same approach we've taken with the proposed rule, where we we underwent, as you know, extensive listening sessions. We met with more than 100,000 individuals through the proposed and final rulemaking process. We received more than 4,000 formal comment letters, and so we are going to continue to rely on extensive feedback, both for the formal process, but also we've been doing a lot more of just informal listening, of picking up the phone and calling clinicians who have reached out to us and asking, hey, what do you think about this dynamic? What do you think about this piece of the qpp.cms.gov website? Is there a clearer way we could say this? Are there materials that we need to get out? So that approach of I think Andy has called it, Andy Slavitt, our acting administrator, has called it user-driven policymaking, is something that we will try to continue as much as possible.
Yeah, no, and I certainly commend the administration, you and Andy and the whole team. You guys have done a great job reaching out to us in the community, listening to care providers, and just in trying to create the best policy possible. So I know a lot of people feel that way. So turning the corner a little bit here, it's a question that I've gotten from across my audiences, and certainly just me in general out there speaking on the rule and the policy. How would we or can we make this like a public-private initiatives versus only Medicare? I mean, I know there are some components to it, but we certainly want to get the private sector, the commercial payers, more involved. So what are some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that it's really important that this not be a Medicare-only initiative, and by this I mean delivery system reform generally, or efforts to improve care. No clinician says, I'm going to provide this standard of care for Medicare patients and this standard of care for my Aetna patients and this standard of care for my state Medicaid patients. That's not the way that people think, and that's not the way anyone wants to deliver care. At the same time, if they're being paid differently and subject to different measures and effectively different revenue outcomes depending on how they treat patients, you can end up with some real confusion. And we've tried to tackle that head on by working with payers, both commercial and state Medicaid agencies, to set some clear direction for payment reform activities. And Secretary Burwell had led the work on announcing payment reform goals to make sure that we are getting to 50% of payments in alternative payment models by 2018, for example. We also had an interim goal for 2016 of 30% that we passed early last year. And the goal here is not just to hit a number, but that to avoid the worst outcomes, which are the ones where you hear these a lot, actually, where we would have a Pioneer ACO participant, for example, that had focused heavily on avoiding preventable readmissions and had found a number of patients where, say for heart failure, that they could be managed more effectively at home. And so the hospital, under traditional fee-for-service payment mechanisms, including old Medicare payment mechanisms, it would have been foregoing revenue. But because they were in a Pioneer ACO, they were able to demonstrate that the patient was getting better care, the patients were having better outcomes, and the system was saving money, and so they would receive a share of that savings. In some of our ACOs, those care benefits spilled over to other payers, which is good. The bad part is that in some cases, those payers were still under a fee-for-service system. So the hospital, even if it was doing the right thing for patients, would be losing revenue. And so we've tried to address that by working with other payers through the Healthcare Payment Reform Learning and Action Network, for example, where we have 8 of the 10 largest commercial payers, many state Medicaid programs engaged. We've also tried to consolidate quality measures where possible. We've worked with the payers to agree around 7 medical specialties, the core quality measure sets that we would use and that they would use, so that for an ACO, for instance, you wouldn't have 3 different ACO quality measure sets, or for maternity care, for OBGYN work, you wouldn't have 5 different measure sets. And we've also been engaged with the relevant medical specialty societies in that work. And so we want to see more and more of that, and continued streamlining of the measure reporting process, so that measures that are gathered are ones that patients actually care about and benefit from and are appropriate, that payers would be asking for accountability on them.
Oh, that's excellent. And for those that may have joined us a little late, my guest today is Tim Gronniger, CMS Deputy Chief of Staff and Director of Delivery System Reform. So moving right along here, Tim, what are CMS? I applauded you on the panel that CMS has been fantastically flexible with clinicians, certainly for the first year, lowered the bar, lots of options when you get into quality measures. You get options, you have 55 to choose from if you're a family practitioner, 37 internal medicine, 20 for cardiology, 21 for ortho, 18 for ENT. I mean, just tons of flexibility. And also, when you want to participate in the program and start the program, tons of flexibility for the first performance year. But what about the second? I mean, any thoughts there on where this direction might go? I know that you can't project too far, but what are some of your thoughts, or at least your intent?
Yeah, so like we discussed a little bit earlier, we want to continue to get input and get feedback on the best way to transition and follow the on-ramp for this program that is most practical and most effective for patients and for clinicians. And so we're using the final rule with comment period to do that. We anticipate that by the third year we will have a full year of reporting required for the program, and that the scoring standards will be based on the average or median performance as is required by the law in that year. Yeah. And so we want to be able to see the second year as a transition between the first year and that third year. We are still working through what we are going to be needing to do for the scoring standards and to make the reporting timing work. So I think that it's something that we are very much using the comments to get information on. We're going to be very interested in making sure that small practices are receiving appropriate accommodations. We are looking to make sure that we are opening as many advanced alternative payment models as possible, which is something that is really ramping up in the second year of the program in 2018. And so we want to make sure that we are continuing with flexibility on into the second year, recognizing that the test option for the first year was a sort of special case where we had a timing where the final rule needed to be out 2 months before the year started, which, by the way, as you noted in Atlanta last month, we are now in the reporting period for the first year of the MIPS program for clinicians who elect to report for a full year. So that's another way to mark the new year. But to conclude on your question, we think that we're going to continue to have a lot of options for participating in the program that are going to be suitable for clinicians in different types of practices.
Excellent. So 2 quick questions left, but closing one on MACRA and MIPS. What advice would you offer clinicians or best practices on how they can be successful with a program from a high level?
Sure. I would say at a high level, you're probably more prepared than you think you are. Yep. The quality payment program is starting slow, so it's easy to make a small bonus. It's easy to get started with the flexible reporting options we've offered with test or partial options, or even it's not, for many clinicians, going to be too challenging to report for the full year. So you should go to qpp.cms.gov to check out the basics. You should make a plan with your practice to think about how you're going to submit the measures information through a registry, electronic health record, or claims, and to choose the measures that you want to focus on. We have an Explore Measures feature on qpp.cms.gov that can be very helpful, and you identified that for most clinicians, there are many more measures available to report on than you need to report on. And you should consider taking advanced steps. You can pick your speed and pace based on your readiness. If you're ready for more advanced steps, you can consider reporting for the full year and maximizing your chance for demonstrating really high quality performance and receiving a positive incentive. And you should look at joining alternative payment models in the future. Joining ACO programs for the 2018 year, for instance, is something that might make sense for a lot of practices.
Oh, great advice. Great advice. So I always ask this of my guests in closing, and we always run out of time faster than we always want to, so I apologize for running out of time. But what's your favorite place to get or be inspired, Tim?
I am going to give probably a more prosaic answer than of some of your other guests, but I'm really inspired by people in my daily life, by my coworkers, by my family. Whenever I'm feeling like I am not able to deliver the results that we're looking for, because there are just too many demands on our time, I look around at what people I'm working with are accomplishing and what they're expecting of me, and I'm amazed by it. And I would say that's true throughout CMS. I've never encountered a more dedicated and motivated group of professionals in my career. And every day at work, I work with people who are from the leadership, people in our office here, through staff all across the agency in Baltimore and Washington. People are just really dedicated to making life better for patients, getting them coverage, making the delivery system work just a little bit better, a little bit at a time. So I am very inspired by the people I work with.
That's a great answer. And believe it or not, it's actually more common than you would think. So,
all right.
Yep, that's excellent.
Good to hear.
Tim, great to have you on the show and as my guest today, and thank you for taking the time out of your really busy schedule to join us.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you. And for everyone listening, thank you very much also for joining us today. And please tune in weekdays at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, 11:30 a.m. Pacific. As always, you can track me on Twitter at HIT Advisor and use the hashtag #ThisJustIn so I can respond to your comments from the show. In addition, all my content will be posted on my website, justinbarnes.com. Thanks, everyone. Have a terrific week.